Sit down anywhere you feel comfortable. Sure.
Hello, Jonathan.
I'm sorry, Jonathan, Brother Bill.
Nu var det nära.
Jag säger fack på biskop, för det sa de inte.
Ja, precis.
Ja, men det är viktigt, jag gillar det. Det är fack. Ja, men den är viktig. Är det julfilm? Eller var det julfilm? Ja, tror jag. Sen gick började gå till TV3 med reklam.
Brother, if you could try to say something and while staying
Absolutely. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Bill, this is Dennis.
Hi, nice to meet you.
This is Monica Mai. Monica is a priest, a retired priest in the Church of Sweden. One of our neighbors and a wonderful friend.
Can you?
Yeah,
Hear over?
good.
All right. And are we connected here?
No. So,
That's power.
that's power. Okay. And then we do this box here. Do you have another use? Yeah.
Once you get it.
And it's fully powered, so if we need to, we can unplug the power.
Yeah.
There it goes.
It's never dark enough in here. When Cheryl Chen tried to show her slides, because these are so, they're not room dark and shades. It's always I know, it's very cozy.
But do you know? Could you open the settings on the?
Yeah.
I'm more used to Windows.
No signal.
Försöker hänga med.
And you hotspot?
Not a hotspot.
Det där är...
Ja, det är
Men du,
någon
ring a mic check.
I think the mic is good. Like the sound.
Mic check. Har du kontakt med internet eller?
Ja, alltså, det är bara att den inte kopplar på här. Ska vi kunna... Jag har min egen dator, jag kan prova om den...
Okay.
What?
Welcome to the world of technical chat.
Yes.
Everywhere in the world. I can remember slideshows. Home movies.
It seemed a little bit.
Let's see if this works. Where the problem lies.
Okay.
But let's see if it goes.
Sometimes it needs to restart in order to catch the signal.
It was the computer.
The computer.
Yeah. That might be.
Let's just move the water out of the way.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, let's see. See if my.
Oh, there you're getting something.
Okay, yeah.
So that turns in.
I hope this one is not broken. Because if it is, it's like.
We could always send it to Google Drive and take it
From my.
you could take it from yours.
Yeah.
Or we could put it on a USB.
And can I try switching this?
Sure, sure.
We're kind of in the order seat, so
We
are.
Taking money for these
Oh,
Oh, wait, something's
I
happening.
guess this would be the
Yeah. Oh, nice. Nice, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's on Pro? No,
No, no.
PowerPoint.
It's PowerPoint.
Yeah.
You can close all that stuff. That
Oh,
one?
nice.
Oh,
And then now you have like a little presenter view here.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No worries. I'm sorry about the delay.
No, no. So Bill, whenever you're ready, you can start.
Varmt välkomna alla som sitter här och som tittar hemifrån till kvällens föreläsning av Brother William T. Bill Short. I år, 2026, så firar vi 800-årsjubileum av Franciscus av Assisi död. Men vi säger inte döden i den franciskanska traditionen, vi säger hans transitus. Han transporterades från detta liv till det eviga livet. Så i samband med det firandet har vi en stor ära och privilegium att bjuda till oss, Brother Bill. Han är också från USA, vi hör till samma före detta provinsen och samma nya provinsen som heter Vår Fru av Guadalupe. Och han kommer i år, har gjort klart 9 år i Rom, Italien, som föreståndare för det International Center for Franciscan Studies and Research, Collegium Santo Buenaventure. Experten tidigare franciskanska källor. Han har också undervisat på the University of San Diego Franciscanska School of Theology. Now I'll go over to English. It's a great privilege and honor to present you this evening my brother, my Franciscan brother, our brother, Brother Bill Short. For the last 9 years, he's been working at the International Franciscan Studies Institute. He is an expert in early Franciscan sources, and he's on his way back to the United States next month. So it's just a wonderful privilege and opportunity to have him with us this evening. Brother Bill will be talking this evening at the first of his 3 lectures on the theme of Francis of Assisi as brother to others, embracing the leper. He'll speak for about 40 minutes, take questions and answers, and then we invite you to the world's fika afterwards. Okay, so I hope nobody ate anything before you came here. Or I hope you'll be hungry again in an hour. So without further ado, Brother Bill.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you for your warm welcome. I'm very pleased to be here for a number of reasons. One is a book that I worked on several years ago. It's called The Book of the Conformities, The Life of Christ and the Life of St. Francis, by a Franciscan named Bartholomew of Pisa, not a very famous man. But in this huge book of kind of Franciscan trivia, he includes a listing of all of the Franciscan churches that he knows in 1385. And among them is Saint Catherine of Visby in Gotland. So you were famous already in the late 14th century in Italy as a Franciscan house in the custody of Dacia. Yeah. So it's, I never thought that I would actually come to visit Visby and see St. Catherine's, I think now. St. Catherine's, yeah. So my Swedish is 0. So it's really delightful to see a bit of this history that I've worked on right here in your lovely city. But tonight we're going to say a few words about this wonderful man, Francis of Assisi. He died on the evening of October the 3rd in 1226. So this year we're marking the 800th anniversary. As Father Charles said to you, we refer to this as the transitus, or the passing of St. Francis, rather than focusing on death. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about Francis and his relevance for the world today. So this evening we'll talk about Francis as brother to others. Tomorrow evening we'll talk about his role as a peacemaker, and then on Thursday evening about his love for the created world. Laudato Si, as Pope Francis reminded us. So let's look at this. Francis as brother, he was very clear about that title, brother, because he read the gospel in a very simple, direct way, and he saw there, call no man on earth father. So he said to his followers, you will all be brothers. And we know that within a few years after some brothers joined him, he also had some sisters, beginning with Chiara di Ofreduccio, Saint Clare of Assisi. Brothers and sisters. His model for the Christian church was a very one teacher only, who is Christ. People to whom Francis was brother, the most remarkable brother that he had, Hansen's disease, known popularly as the disease of leprosy, a disease which for Francis and his contemporaries was one of the most frightening aspects of medieval life. So let's just take a moment to look at how Francis comes to this embrace with the leper. We begin by looking at his own reading and his own reflection on the gospel, because he decided that he wanted the gospel to be the model for living. This we could take very much for granted today as 21st century Christians, that yes, we want to live according to the gospel. In Francis's day, this was not common. The instructions for how to live as a Christian were in the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, where the disciples were all together for the breaking of the bread and the prayers, and they had all things in common. It's kind of a settled existence in a big city in Jerusalem, with a lovely liturgy in the temple of Jerusalem at different hours of the day, and then the breaking of bread in their own homes, what we believe is an early form of the Eucharist. You have roles clearly defined, apostles and deacons, and it's kind of neat and tidy. The gospel, the life of Jesus with his disciples, is not in a big city. It's not stable. They're moving from place to place. It includes men and women, sinners, tax collectors, It's kind of a very mixed group with no organization except Jesus is the teacher and everyone else is disciples. If you construct a model of the church on that way of living, it looks very different from the pattern of what was called the life of the apostles. Francis wants very specifically to follow not only the words of Jesus in the gospel, which he calls doctrina, the doctrine, but also the example of Jesus. That is, the things that he does even without speaking. He calls these vestigia, or footprints, things that you can see where Jesus has passed. So words and deeds of Jesus. And specifically, he finds that in the gospel, Jesus speaks about lepers, so words, and he heals lepers, example, especially in Luke's gospel. I think many people have said that Luke has more interest in medicine than most of the others. We have a number of illustrated manuscripts from the Middle Ages that illustrate these stories from Luke's gospel. Here, the healing of the 10 lepers. It's kind of like a cartoon in a way, because they're in very small letters above the heads of these people. It says, Decem lebrosi. Here are 10 lepers. So in case you missed that. Notice also the red spots on the body. This was the common way to portray someone as having leprosy. Although, as we know today, those kinds of spots can be caused by many different kinds of diseases. So the diagnosis of leprosy was not entirely certain in the Middle Ages. Here, the important thing is that Jesus heals lepers. That is, he comes into contact with them. He is not afraid of them, and in fact, heals them. The moral of the story, of course, is that only one returns to give thanks. So that's what Luke wants to emphasize, the need to thank God when we receive something like healing. But we also have a very interesting story that became famous in the world of lepers in the Middle Ages. And that was the story of Lazarus and the rich man, sometimes called Lazarus and Dives, or Dives, the rich man, from Luke 16. And again, we have a little caption underneath saying, he is in the bosom of Abraham. Okay, so that is, we know which part of the gospel we're in. Here is Lazarus outside the rich man's house. The dogs licking his sores, so it's rather close to the gospel story. But notice the marks on the body of Lazarus, those red spots. Because the gospel says that he has sores, people came to the conclusion that Lazarus had leprosy. Luke doesn't say that. There was a perfectly good word for saying leprosy, but he didn't use it. Other people interpreted that Lazarus not only was a leper, but that Jesus, in telling the story, says that he is in the bosom of Abraham. Therefore, Lazarus is in heaven. So he must be a saint. That is Saint Lazarus. And that gives the name to the hospitals for lepers in the Middle Ages, including in Visby. Luke also gives us a teaching of Jesus, a comment of Jesus about how God chooses unusual people. In chapter 4, there were many lepers in Israel, Jesus says, during the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. And in case you were wondering, that's Naaman. And look what he has on his body, red spots. So Naaman is a leper. teaching about leprosy, healing lepers. We have a number of examples in the gospel where Francis could know that Jesus paid attention to people with Hansen's disease, as it's called today. In the Middle Ages, leprosy, up until the time of the Crusade, was relatively rare. It had been known during the time of the Roman Empire, probably brought back by soldiers who went with the Roman legions to other countries, particularly to the Middle East. But it came back to Europe, and it came back more strongly when knights returned from the Crusade in the Middle East carrying leprosy in the 12th and 13th centuries. And following them also merchants and other people who had traveled to the Middle East. So we have a kind of explosion of infection in Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries. By the 14th century, it begins to decrease again. The populations in the Middle East had always had leprosy in their society, so most people had a very high resistance to the bacterium that causes leprosy. Europeans who came into the Middle East had no resistance, and so they contracted the illness. And leprosy is a very democratic disease. It does not distinguish. It can affect anyone, rich and poor, men and women, young and old. Here we have a very unusual picture. These men all have the same kind of haircut, shaved on top and a fringe around this way. These are clerics or priests, identified by their haircut, and they have the red spots on them, so they are members of the clergy who have leprosy. And the bishop here, whose face does not have spots on it, is giving them instruction, because now they are going to have to be separated from the rest of the population and go to the Lazar house, the house of St. Lazarus, where they will be confined. So this is one illustration of the ways in which even people who would be considered at the higher levels of society were susceptible to the disease, whereas we often have the idea it's a disease of the poor. Someone has said, actually Dr. Hansen from Norway, who discovered the bacterium early 1900s, his research showed that the bacterium is likely to affect people who have a richer diet rather than people who have a poor diet. So people actually in the middle and the upper levels of society were quite susceptible to infection. Shortly before he dies in 1226, Francis has some brother help him to write his testament. He was blind by that time. He couldn't see to write. He couldn't bear the light of the sun or even of a fire. So his eyesight was very, very bad. But he dictated his testament, several pages long, kind of rehearsing for himself and others what were the most important moments in his life of conversion to the gospel. And he says this: "The Lord gave me, Brother Francis, thus to begin doing penance." And for him, doing penance is what he means by conversion to the Christian life. "In this way, for when I was in sin, it seemed too bitter for me to see lepers." So this is looking back at the time when he was in his early 20s, and he remembers this, that just seeing lepers for him was bitter, didn't like it. Notice another detail here though. The person not only now has not just red spots, but something that looked like blisters or bumps on the skin. A very unusual form of a hat. It looks like a kind of rain hat. And in his right hand, he has a wooden clapper, some wooden sticks that when shaken will make a noise. The wooden clapper is the sign of the leper in the Middle Ages, and we still have some of these preserved in museums. This was also used in the church during the liturgy of the Passion of Christ on Good Friday. When they would not ring a bell, they would make a noise with a wooden clapper. We often hear or we see in movies the picture of a leper in the Middle Ages ringing a bell, saying, "Leper, leper, go away, go away." No, most of them did not have bells. Bells were expensive. They had wooden clappers. Makes a noise like sticks banging together. But they had to announce their presence. Continuing from the Testament, Francis tells us, "And the Lord himself led me among them, and I showed mercy to them." Now he said this was at the very beginning of his experience of an adult conversion, we might call it today. That's dated to around 1206, so early 20s. He died when he was in his mid-40s. So this image of Francis with the towel hanging there on the side indicates the kind of service that would be required, what kind of works of mercy you would do. One of them was simply cleaning, washing people that had the disease. "And when I left them, what had seemed bitter to me was turned into sweetness of soul and body. And afterwards, I delayed a little and left the world." That is, he left his family, he left his job, the family clothing business, he left his friends, he left the city, he went down to live with the lepers, and he never went back to Assisi again. Understandable if you think about it. Once you've become a volunteer, and they were called penitents, penitenti, someone who puts himself or herself at the service of the people in the hospital for lepers, you might be infected. We're not going to invite you to our house for pizza tomorrow. We don't really want to shake hands. No, I mean, it's great that you're helping those poor people, but we don't think you should live inside the town. Maybe you should live outside the walls. This is the way that Francis's life begins to unfold. It's not like in the movies where these, brilliant lights and voices from heaven. In Francis's own words, it happened because the Lord led him to help people who were really sick with an infectious disease, and that changed his life for lots of reasons. In the early 1220s, after Francis had a large community, hundreds, maybe thousands of followers, in the space of 10 or 11 years, the numbers had really grown, not only of the men, but also of the women. He wanted to give them some instructions for how to live, and they worked together as kind of a committee, year after year, every year at Pentecost, So we'll be celebrating Pentecost next Sunday. They would meet in Assisi from all over the world, as many as could gather, and they would craft this document called the Rule for their way of life. And there we read in chapter 9 that the brothers, so Francis and his followers, must rejoice when they live among people considered of little value and looked down upon, among the poor and the powerless, the sick and the lepers, and the beggars by the wayside. Here we have Francis. Here we have kneeling people asking for a favor. Here we have a man with that characteristic hat. Can you see the kind of rain hat? What has he got in his hand? A wooden clapper. He's a leper. And on this side, it seems to be the same man walking away without his clapper and without his hat. So healed of his leprosy through the prayers of St. Francis. This is actually pictured as St. Francis after his death, working miracles for people who came to visit Assisi. So these are pilgrims who are coming there, asking for healing. But Francis and his followers also craft some rather specific instructions about how they're going to express this care for people suffering from the disease. In this same document in chapter 8, it speaks about how the brothers can perform for these leper houses other services. They can beg alms for a manifest need of the lepers, but let them beware of money. Francis was very, very suspicious about money because Jesus sends his disciples out with no money in their purses. So Francis says we should do the same. If we need to beg, let's beg for what we need, which is food or clothing or a place to sleep, but we will not beg for money. One exception, the manifest need of the lepers. When you have a really strict rule and you make an exception, it means that that's something or someone who's very important to you. So the one exception here is for a manifest need of the lepers. But be careful, let's not go crazy with this collecting money thing. But if it's for the lepers, yeah, it's probably okay. Where did Francis and the brothers do this work of caring for people? Probably in this place. These are the remains of the little church of St. Lazarus of Arce, the remains of the Assisi leper hospital from the 13th century. Once again, notice St. Lazarus, that's the very common name. And here it's not very far away from the little church that was Francis's favorite, St. Mary of the Angels of the Porziuncula, or the little portion. Here's the front. It's all that remains of the hospital, really, is this little chapel. This is the front, little bell up there. You have to imagine a hospital arranged like a monastery, probably, with walls all around it to keep the people inside so they would not infect other people. And this might be a familiar picture to you. This is the equivalent here in Visby, St. Göran, no, my Swedish, yeah. A site of a leper hospital founded in the 13th century. And from its location, just looking there behind the hospital, which is also called Lazaret, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, it's coming from that, outside the city walls. So that's where the city, oh. Do we need power there? Or
Det
what?
seems to come back.
Okay, something, when you,
You
I got the electricity. But I just thought that was so interesting. And that a Franciscan presence began here in the 13th century as well. I'm just wondering what connection there might have been. We know that in Germany, for example, when Franciscans first arrived in a town, they would ask for hospitality at the leper hospital because they always had rooms available. And very often that's where the friars would first begin to work. And in exchange for their work there, they would get food and clothing. So it was kind of an early Franciscan motel. But it also shows a preference to be among these people who were considered a danger, I suppose. And here is perhaps the most famous story, because it works very well, especially in novels and in the movies. And it's a beautiful story. From the first life of St. Francis, written just 2 years after his death by a brother named Thomas of Celano from central Italy, someone who had known Francis personally, but probably not very well. He was sent very early on the new mission to Germany, so he didn't really stay in Italy very long. He writes this: the early days of Francis's conversion, you can see he's still dressed in beautiful clothes there. When he started thinking of holy and useful matters with the grace and strength of the Most High, while still in the clothes of the world, so dressed like a merchant's son would be dressed, he met a leper one day. Made stronger than himself, he came up and kissed him. He then began to consider himself less and less, until by the mercy of the Redeemer, he came to complete victory over himself. This has been painted many times. It's been included in films about the life of St. Francis, because this is a dramatic gesture that illustrates his care for people with this disease. The problem with it is, if you tell only this story, it can easily seem like a one-time event. With the context that we've seen there from the writings of Francis himself, we know that this was just the beginning of a lifelong dedication to be with these people and to serve them. So we shouldn't let this kind of photo opportunity moment disguise that there's a much bigger story here. But this makes for the best painting.
Well, even the horse is entranced. The horse is
Look
staring
at that.
at the scene. I mean,
That horse is pretty interesting.
he's really entranced. He can't believe what that horse is seeing.
Yeah.
He says, "Look what my master is doing."
I have never seen this before.
That's right. He is witnessing it.
You just pointed out something I didn't see there. But now, we're going to see in a minute, there's another horse, and I think you're right. Now, this is still his biographer, Thomas of Celano, telling his story. He used to say that the sight of lepers was so bitter to him. What do we got here? There's the hat, there are the spots on the skin, and there's the wooden clapper. After a while, this becomes easy to identify. The sight of lepers was so bitter to him that in the days of his vanity, when he saw their houses even 2 miles away, he would cover his nose with his hands. One of the very bad effects of Hansen's disease, or leprosy, is that the skin on the extremities can begin to rot. I've had the privilege of visiting some of the last patients in the leper village of Kalapapa in Hawaii on the island of Molokai, because I have a great devotion to Saint Damien of Molokai, the leper priest of Molokai. And Franciscan sisters are still there. They've been there for over 100 years, caring for the last of the patients who still live on the island. They're all very old now. But they will tell me that one of the great benefits of modern medication, basically sulfa, which is what treats Hansen's disease, is that they no longer have that terrible smell. Because they said even for them, the smell of the flesh was really, really bad. So it's not surprising that somebody like Francis, from a relatively wealthy merchant class home, would find the sight and even the smell of lepers to be really repugnant. Thomas continues, "Then the holy lover of profound humility moved to the lepers and stayed with them. For God's sake, he served all of them with great love." We have a very interesting story from a later biographical source, maybe one of the more famous, called The Little Flowers of St. Francis, or the Fioretti, in which it says there was one of the brothers who was assigned to care for one of the patients in the hospital in Assisi. And when Francis went to visit the hospital one day, this man told Francis he was very unhappy with the service that he was getting from this brother. He was not getting properly cleaned, and what he said was, "I smell horrible." So he wanted Francis to tell, I think we have to imagine that this brother did not really want to clean him very well, because physical contact, possible infection. And this man noticed it. So Francis said, "I will come." And the interesting detail is, it said he took water, he warmed it, and he put in sweet smelling herbs. So he made something that smelled better, and he washed the man with that. And then the story ends, and soon after, he was healed. So was it the medicinal herbs? Or we don't know. But just to say, the level of personal contact with people affected by the disease was very high. And so, yes, we do have several examples of some of the brothers who contracted the illness themselves. Thomas goes on to describe in some detail how Francis worked. He washed all the filth from them and even cleaned out the pus of their sores. So Francis was not afraid of real, direct, basic medical care. I mean, this is like basic nursing care. And there's a nice pot of water there. I don't see any medicinal herbs, but maybe he's thrown a few in there. And the towel around the waist, making us think of also Jesus at the Last Supper, washing the feet of the disciples. There's an echo in there as well. Another text from early followers of Francis is written about 15 years after the first biography. As some of the companions were getting up in years, very wisely, someone said, "We have to write down those stories that you've told about the early days with Francis." So we get this life of Francis told by his companions, Brother Leo, Brother Angelo, and Brother Rufino, 3 companions. They recount this. One day, while he was praying enthusiastically to the Lord, he received this response: "Francis, everything you loved carnally and desired to have, you must despise and hate if you wish to know my will. Because once you begin doing this, what before seemed delightful and sweet, now we're hearing echoes of those words in the Testament, what was sweet to me, will be unbearable and bitter. And what before made you shudder will offer you great sweetness and enormous delight. He was overjoyed at this and was comforted by the Lord. But it's still not clear exactly what this is. Then, here's the horse again. Looking pretty interested too, I must say, now that you've told me that, I'm noticing it. One day he was riding his horse near Assisi, so same story told by other people, when he met a leper. And even though he usually shuddered at lepers, he made himself dismount and gave him a coin, so alms, kissing his hand as he did so, which is a very noble gesture, usually for someone of superior rank. After he accepted a kiss of peace from him, Francis remounted and continued on his way. He then began to consider himself less and less, until by God's grace he came to complete victory over himself. Here we have the spots on the leopard, no hat and no clapper, but that look of shock and surprise on his face and on the face of the horse. It's going like this. What's going on? I don't know what this is about. Yeah. The Life of St. Francis seen through horses. It could be a new book. And now the companions remember this next phase. After a few days, he moved to a hospice of lepers, probably that San Lazzaro del Arce, taking with him a large sum of money. Calling them all together, as he kissed the hand of each, he gave them alms. When he left there, what before had been bitter, that is, to see and touch lepers, was turned into sweetness. So that becomes his preferred place to stay, especially when he is traveling. With the help of God's grace, he became such a servant and friend of the lepers that, as he testified in his testament, he stayed among them and served them with humility. So Francis may be a saint for many different reasons. I mean, his love of nature, his very strong commitment to peacemaking, his intense life of prayer, his very personal reading of the gospel. All of those would make him a holy man, a saint. But I think that perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects is this constant, over the 20 years of service, off and on, to people with a feared and infectious disease for which no cure was known at the time. That is really laying down your life for others. It's heroic. Thomas of Celano then goes on to talk about other things, and one of the things he wants to talk about is the work that brothers did in the early days. And here, not surprisingly, we have a story about, look at the hat, look at the spots. This man has a bell instead of a wooden clapper. This might be a wealthy person with the disease. During the day, those brothers who knew how worked with their own hands, staying in the houses of lepers or in other suitable places, serving everyone humbly and devoutly. So this was their job, serving lepers during the day, and at night they would retire to these abandoned churches where they lived, like the little church of St. Mary of the Angels, which, as we will see in a moment, is just a short walk from the leper hospital of St. Lazarus. At the beginning of the religion, that is the community of the brothers, after the brothers grew in number, he wanted the brothers to stay in hospitals of lepers to serve them. At that time, whenever nobles and commoners came to the religion, so the religious community, they were told, among other things, that they had to serve the lepers and stay in their houses. This comes from a source written in the 1240s to 1260s called the Assisi Compilation. Again, writing down the memories of brothers who had been with Francis in the early days. Now, this is getting to be 30 to 40 years after his death, but they get these reminiscences written down. This is actually, I would say 19th century wood carving from the sanctuary of Greccio in Italy, demonstrating a kind of group service of people in the leper hospital. We don't have too many sculptures of this. Courtesy of Google Maps, we can now see what the geography of leprosy was in and around Assisi. This dot right there along Via Santa Maria Maddalena, St. Mary Magdalene, that is where the ruins of that little church of St. Lazarus are today. And in fact, that is next to the cemetery. So it's interesting that they have made the cemetery in the place of San Rufino de Arce. Arce is the same place where the leper hospital was. So they then put a cemetery there. Maybe just expanding the cemetery that had been attached to the hospital. Walking along this nice, straight, modern road over to the Basilica of St. Mary of the Angels of the Porciuncula takes 27 minutes. It's 2.2 kilometers. So you could easily walk over there, go to work during the day, come back to the little church at night for your prayers and also to sleep. This may explain also why the little church of St. Mary, which was old already when Francis moved there, the reason why it was abandoned and no one lived in the area, it's because they had built the leper hospital here. Apparently the people had left and the church was deserted. Fear of contagion. We then have a source from the companions that tells a rather extended story that I think is a good kind of concluding dramatic representation of this service. Brother James, also called James the Simple, was like the doctor for those with severe sores, and he gladly touched, changed, and treated their wounds. So he actually has something in his hand here that looks like tweezers or a scalpel or something, and there are the spots. So clearly this is work in a leper hospital. As if reproving Brother James, Blessed Francis told him, "You should not take our Christian brothers about in this way, since it is not right for you or for them." He had brought this patient out of the hospital and had brought him over to show him the church. Blessed Francis used to call lepers Christian brothers. That was his name for them. So this is someone whose daily work is taking care of the severe cases. And they obviously have enough experience that they actually distinguish between one and another. Although he was pleased that Brother James helped and served them, the Holy Father said this because he did not want him to take those with severe sores out of the hospital. So people with the most severe cases should not leave. But others apparently could come over to the church because nobody else lived there. So there was no problem with infection there. This was especially because Brother James was very simple. And he often went with a leper to the Church of St. Mary, and especially because people usually abhorred lepers who had severe sores. So here we see the severe sores. So there's some fear there. There was also a law in the city of Assisi that lepers who were found outside the hospital, particularly at night, could be put to death by anyone without punishment. So it was pretty serious. So that was probably wise. But then watch the reaction. After he said these things, Blessed Francis immediately reproached himself. And he told his fault to Brother Peter of Catania, because Blessed Francis believed that in reproving Brother James, he had shamed the leper, who clearly heard this conversation. He has a serious case. You shouldn't bring him over here to the church. Then he thinks, oh, I've now shamed this patient. Blessed Francis said, let this be my penance. I will eat together with my Christian brother from the same dish. This is a great sign of friendship and family belonging in Italy, to eat from the same dish. It means you're very close. So this is Francis's way of saying, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. While Blessed Francis was sitting at the table with the leper and the other brothers, so patients from the hospital also came in apparently to eat with the brothers, a bowl was placed between the two of them. The leper was completely covered with sores and ulcerated, and especially the fingers with which he was eating were deformed and bloody, so that whenever he put them in the bowl, blood dripped into it. Brother Peter and the other brothers saw this, grew very sad, but did not dare say anything out of fear of the Holy Father. The one who wrote this saw it and bore witness to it. The level of personal contact with infected people was very great. When we look at the many different diseases that Francis had in his 40s and which led to his death, some of them can probably be traced to forms of what's called the tubercular form of Hansen's disease. It doesn't manifest in blisters or scaly skin, but rather in coughing blood. It's like tuberculosis. And stories like this would help to explain that Francis, perhaps among other things, also suffered from the effects of exposure to Hansen's disease. That's the story from Francis's life. The question I think that we can take away from this is that Francis cared for those with leprosy and called them his Christian brothers and sisters. And I think we too can love and serve Christ by caring for those who suffer in our world today, it may not be leprosy. Hansen's disease is now, thankfully, not very common in many parts of the world. But we know that there are other people who suffer in many ways. Francis can be an inspiring example to us. And to conclude, I have the English version of that beautiful Swedish prayer that you have on those cards. And I can say it in English, and those who would like can also read along in Swedish. A prayer that Pope Leo wrote specifically for this year to celebrate St. Francis. Saint Francis, our brother, you who 800 years ago went to meet Sister Death as a man of peace, intercede for us with the Lord. Before the cross of San Damiano, you recognized true peace. Teach us to seek in Christ the source of all reconciliation that breaks down every wall. You who, unarmed, crossed the lines of war and misunderstanding, give us the courage to build bridges where the world erects borders. In this time, plagued by conflict and division, intercede so that we may become peacemakers, unarmed and disarming witnesses of the peace that comes from Christ. Amen. So thank you very much, and happy 800th anniversary of St. Francis. Now I can see the chef already moving into position back there, so we know that some good thing will be happening. Let's just take a couple of minutes, though, if someone has a question they would like to ask.
I was really fascinated with the penultimate slide that showed with Francis and the severely marked leper that he himself is bearing the stigmata already.
Yeah.
And so the artist is clearly showing us the big red spots on his hands and further uniting him, with the affliction.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really beautiful artistic touch in that.
We'll just go back and take a look at
Yeah.
that slide. So
Yeah.
you can see the red spots here on the leper, and Francis with the marks of the stigmata, or the marks of the passion on his hands. Yeah, very striking image.
I haven't seen that before, and it's really a fabulous image because of uniting them in that way artistically.
Great sign of solidarity between the two. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, it's very inspiring, but also like it's. I mean, it's very like the message kind of conflicts a lot with like today's view on utilitarian the consequences of things. Because I mean, like if you expose yourself to leper, you might not be able to do as much good in the future because you might be dead.
Right.
I'm not saying that but what do you think? What do you think Francis would say to his disciples or his brothers to inspire them to actually go to the lepers and to break this kind of human conflict?
Francis was very clear. He did not want people to imitate him.
Yeah.
That's not what this is about. And towards his death, some of his followers actually asked this question: will you give us instructions about what we're supposed to do? He said, I have done what was mine to do. May God tell you what is yours. So he's got this sense that every person can have a call like he had, but it's probably not going to be the same. So for us today, I would say, what is the call that we feel to show mercy, to show care or compassion for people who are suffering? very likely it's not going to be the same as Francis. It's going to be very different today.
But but you still mentioned like that he's told his brothers to care for the lepers, right?
Right.
But yeah, but I guess it was.
He told them to do that in 1220,
Okay.
but he can't tell us in 2026
No.
what to do because he's dead.
No.
So we have to figure that out.
Right.
But we can be inspired by his example.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but we're not called to imitate him. Otherwise, as I said to people, loquamur latine, we'd have to speak in Latin. We're just not there.
Thank you.
I just want one comment, one
Yes.
story, if I may.
You want to get up here where people can see you?
Oh, sure.
About 12 years ago, I went with a group of Franciscans from California to Vietnam. And there was a quite sizable Catholic Christian minority in Vietnam, 8 to 10 million people. And after the communists came to power in 1974, many of the Catholic institutions just disappeared, and clergy and sisters and lay people, catechists, they were all thrown into prison for re-education. By the late 80s, many of them were released. And then something very interesting happened. The Catholic communities went to the communist authorities and said, we would like to offer our services free of charge for the service of the country. And the amazing thing was that there were enough former Christians and Catholics in the communist regime that they saw this is a real bargain. So they said to the sisters and the brothers, including the Franciscans, tell you what, you can take care of all the people we don't want to spend money on. You can because it's too expensive for the government. So if you can get foreign money, use your own money, fine. You can have the orphans, you can have victims of Agent Orange, you can have people in the AIDS hospice, and you can have people who have leprosy. And that is the way the Catholic community began to start disempowered, no resources whatsoever, started with the very roots of service to others, and actually became such credible witnesses to the gospel, such credible, authentic witnesses in the society, that the level of cooperation between, what you see black and white all the time, between the authorities and people in the church changed very significantly over time. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you very much.
And I think too, brother, if I may say this, we always talk in Swedish about den röda tråden som går igenom saker och ting. The red thread that goes through things. So Brother Bill talks really about the beginning about Jesus our brother, following in the steps of Jesus our brother, and they recognize that all people are brothers, not only but especially those who are despised by others. So that's our challenge. And I just want to say thank you so much for all of this.
Thank you. Tack.
And then I have two other things to do. And I'm going to ask.
I'm going to ask Octavia to give this to you, because when she arrived, Octavia said, I hope he says something about St. Clair.
Well, Brother Short, thank you so much for a really inspiring beginning of 3 fantastic evenings with you. I am personally so honored and privileged to be here to listen to you. So with thanks and appreciation from dear Charles and the rest of the congregation.
All right.
Please.
Thank you very much.
The other thing I'd like to say is
Aha.
today is Brother Bill's birthday.
Oh, my stars.
Yamo haleva, Yamo haleva, Yamo haleva uti 100 år. Ja visst ska han leva, ja visst ska han leva, ja visst ska han leva uti 100 år.
Och sen,
När Anna lever.
och vem han lever, och vem han lever uti 100 år. Då ska han leva, ja då ska han leva, ja då ska han leva där i änglarna
You're gonna live
bor.
to be 100.
Och sen kan somebody börja med bra.
Hurra!
Bra. Okay. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, Brother Bill. Happy birthday to you.
And also my brother George in Seattle.
Okay, George is
Lovely.
Så vi bjuder alla till världens fika. Vi ger oss flera minuter på det sättet fram.
You'll be seeing George soon, I hope.
In June.
Okay, good. That's great.
You got your birthday filmed live.
No, isn't that great?